Good morning. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson, and we're continuing our study of 1 Peter. We're in chapter 3, and today we're going to read verses 1 through 7. This is a continuation of the section of house rules that parallels a similar section in Ephesians 5 through 6 and in Colossians 3, where Paul gives a set of rules for a happy home, for a Christian home. And in Colossians and Ephesians, the Apostle Paul talks about husbands, wives, children, and servants. Here, Peter talks about servants and husbands and wives, but he doesn't address children at all. We talked about servants last time. So verses 1 through 7, he's going to be talking about husbands and wives. There's so much in these 7 verses. In the same way, you wives, be submissive to your own husbands, even so that even if any of them are disobedient to the word, they may be won without a word by the behavior of their wives, as they observe your chaste and respectful behavior. And let not your adornment be external, braiding of the hair, wearing gold jewelry, and putting on dresses. Let it be the hidden person of the heart, with the imperishable quality of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is precious in the sight of God. For in this way, in former times, the holy women also, who hoped in God, used to adorn themselves, being submissive to their own husbands. Thus Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. And you have become her children if you do what is right without being frightened by any fear. You husbands likewise live with your wives in an understanding way, as with the weaker vessel, since she is a woman, and grant her honor as a fellow heir of the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered. It is so easy with our 21st century sensibility and vocabulary to misread this. He's addressing wives. He's assuming that many, if not most of these wives, have husbands who are not Christians and who do not share Christian values. And so the first thing he says is, as all Christians assume a posture of submission, which is the same thing that Paul says in Ephesians 5. Christians submit. He's already said this. Christians submit. And we've talked for days about the difference between submission and obedience. You be submissive to your husbands. Don't make this a test of will with them. Just be a Christian woman. And if that doesn't win them over, if they do not see in the genuineness of your faith in your life, then winning an argument is not going to accomplish anything. And then he says, your value is who you are inside, not on the outside. He's not saying never braid your hair, wear jewelry, because he also says putting on dresses. Yeah, he would have said, if he is prohibiting anything, he's prohibiting wearing of clothing altogether. What he's saying is the value that you place on yourself should be based upon who you are inside, not what you wear externally. And liberating women from the culture of fashion and of cultural expectations about what they're supposed to look like. He says that doesn't matter to God at all in the least. What matters to God is who you are inside, and that should matter to you as well. And then he uses Sarah as an example. Now, he's quoting the Old Testament a lot in this book. And so even though his listeners are predominantly Gentiles, not Jews, Jewish in their background, they evidently know the Old Testament. And Peter certainly knows the Old Testament. And if there is a single woman in the Old Testament who is assertive above all others, it's Sarah. It is Sarah herself. And yet he references a particular episode in Sarah's life when she called Abraham Lord, which she was not in the habit of doing. It's when she made a joke in Genesis chapter 18 about being 90 years old and having a child. Will I, from my Lord, receive pleasure at my age? And yet, even though she laughed, Abraham had faith, and she was submissive to Abraham in that moment, and they did have a child a year later, just like God had said. And so he's calling them back to that example, and he's not telling these Christian women to be doormats or second-class citizens. In fact, he tells Christian husbands that their wives are fellow heirs. They are equally inheriting the gifts of God as you are. Women in Roman society and in Jewish society weren't fellow heirs with their brothers in any possible way. But in the kingdom, men and women are equals in the sight of God. There, she's your fellow heir. And he reminds them that their wives are a weaker vessel. Vessel means your physical body. So spiritually, intellectually, in every way that is eternal, your wife is your equal. But generally speaking, you're bigger and stronger than she is. And you are not to take advantage of that in any way. But you respect your wives and you live with them in an understanding way. Is there a command that God has given to husbands that wives hold more important than this? Don't just get by, but make the effort to understand your wife. And then he says in verse 6 that a woman should not in any way be afraid in her home. And then he says in verse 7 to the husbands, if you don't get this right, your spiritual life is not going to be healthy. Your prayers are going to be hindered. Your communication with God, your relationship with God is going to necessarily suffer if your relationship with your wife is not right. Now, that's what Peter says. And Peter says, if you're going to survive the hardship of living in a sinful and a hostile world, you better get this right. That's what Peter says in 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 1 through 7. We'll pick up his summary next time. Thank you for joining me. Another 5 good minutes.